Michael Broadway is a professor emeritus of geography and the former dean of arts and sciences at Northern Michigan University up in Marquette. He also happens to be my brother-in-law. And he and his wife came down for the weekend for a wedding in the family. And this is the second time this year that he's come down for a family event and presented two classes to HASP. In February, he presented a class on the impact of a meatpacking plant on small community, and also the changing demographics of the UP, I believe was the other one that you did. He's recently published on a variety of food and drink related topics, including on coffee houses and food tourism. He's also studied the factors driving the UP's demographics. In terms of the program today, food tourism, place on a plate. Food is increasingly used in marketing tourist destinations based upon the destination's unique ties to the natural and cultural environment, or its terroir. Promoting regional food culture is increasingly used in rural economic development efforts. This presentation will report the results of the presenter's research on how two different regions, one in Ireland and one in Michigan, have attempted to convey a sense of place by incorporation of locally produced food in local restaurants. So help me welcome Professor Broadway. I want to add one thing. We'd like to let Michael go with the first 15 or 20 minutes to lay out his thesis without questions. But then at that point, I'm sure he's going to open it up. He'll have some questions for us and allow us to ask questions of him. But let's give him 15 or 20 minutes to lay out his thesis.
Okay, first off, I apologize. I've been looking at this slide and I realized there's a typo. And I know that if I was teaching a regular university class, I would be the first to confess that there is a typographical error. Did anybody see the typo? Yeah, what the hell? So, mea culpa, I do apologize. Not a good start. Yeah, all sorts. Anyway, thank you, Andy, and thank you for showing up on a beautiful Monday afternoon in the summer, isn't it? It's summer. So hopefully I can make it worth your while. As I say, I'm used to be a college professor, so I always like to think that at the end of a presentation, you will have learned something. And I just have basically four ideas here, some of which you're probably familiar with, and maybe some others that you're not. So the first notion is the concept of terroir and the concept of slow food, because those two concepts are very much tied into how places can use food to promote their unique identity. So we'll talk about terroir and slow food, and how food can be utilized to promote a sense of place. So when I say North Dakota, what comes to your mind? Cold, right? It's not food. It's not food, right? If I say Napa Valley, there you go. So we associate certain places with certain foods and drinks. And when I suppose you think of West Michigan, what do you think of? Cherries, perhaps, in beer. Yeah. So how food can be utilized to promote a sense of place. And I guess if I was really picky, I'd probably put the word unique in front of sense, a unique sense of place, because I'm sure all of you are fairly well traveled. And more people, when they travel, they want to go to a unique place. They don't want to go to a place that other people have been to. They want to be able to come back and say, oh, we went to so-and-so and the food was fantastic, or words to that effect. So food tourism is a very popular means of promoting rural economic development, primarily because rural areas tend to be much poorer areas. And so if you can get people to come and spend their money in your community, that's a means of job creation and a means of economic development. And increasingly, food tourism is used to promote rural economic development. And we have the Upper Peninsula, which I'll talk about in the second part of the presentation. And the fourth idea, of course, is it sounds great, doesn't it? You can promote a unique sense of place by promoting food tourism. It's a lot harder, as the results of my analysis will show. Now, if you've ever been to one of my presentations, you know that I hate talking for more than about 20 minutes without breakout for questions or even me throwing questions back at the class. So that's how this will be run. So we'll have a little introduction, some questions, and as far as I'm concerned, if you want to raise your hand at any point and ask me a question, that's fine too. I prefer to have this a discussion rather than a lecture. So I got interested in food tourism. I'm not sure how I got interested. Oh, I know how. Now I know how it was. Have you ever heard of the concept of slow food? We'll get to that. They're actually slow cities. It's a spin-off of the concept of slow food. And it turns out there is a town in Southwest Ireland called Clonakilty, population 4,500. It is Ireland's only slow city. And so I did a study of what it means to be a slow city in Clonakilty, Ireland. And while I was there, I realized that Southwest Ireland is sort of the gourmet food capital of Ireland, and they promote food tourism. And I thought, well, I'm being paid to be a geography professor, and I can turn this into a study. So I was able to come up with some money. Thank you, State of Michigan. And I was able to go to Southwest Ireland and do a study of how they were trying to implement a strategy of promoting food tourism in West Cork. So we'll talk a little bit about what food tourism is and how there are now food trails. Some of you may have actually been on a food trail as part of a tourist experience. No? Yes? Okay. That's fine. Perfectly legitimate. And I'll describe what the West Cork food trail is. It turns out there are 3 food trails in West Cork. I'll tell you about the one that I went on, and then the putting place on a plate in the UP, the potential that exists within the Upper Peninsula to promote food tourism, and I'll give you the results of an analysis of Marquette restaurants and their attempts to put place on a plate in the UP. So that's it. Okay. So tourists are increasingly encouraged to taste a place. How many of you ever thought about tasting a place? All right, so what place? Anywhere in Italy. Excellent choice. Yes. Croatia. Ireland. Have you been to West Cork? Oh, so you have. Are you from that part of Ireland?
I didn't realize, but when I went to Ireland, I wanted, the potato soup, the leeks, all of that. And when you started your lecture, I thought, well, that's just what I did. So that's it.
Okay, so more and more people are looking for unique tourist experiences, and food is one way to experience the uniqueness of a place. There are there are regional cuisines, and in the European Union, they've come out with a way of actually branding certain foodstuffs which are geographically restricted to certain places. So Parmesan Reggiano, that cheese can only be produced from 4,000 dairy farmers in an area of north central Italy. Anything else that any other type of Parmesan cheese cannot be called Parmesan Reggiano. And that explains why it's so expensive. And there are over 350 different foodstuffs that have unique characteristics which have been branded in the European Union. And when Britain was part of the EU, something as commonplace as cheddar cheese, that was one of those EU brands that it had to come from that area of Somerset. Okay, so people are constantly searching for unique experiences. So one of the key ideas is this notion of slow food, and slow food originated in Italy. In the 1980s, McDonald's wanted to open a restaurant in the center of Italy, in the center of Rome, next door to the Spanish Steps. Some of you may have been to the Spanish Steps. This was not a very popular idea. And amongst, I think it's fair to say, left-wing intellectuals in Italy, they saw this as sort of American cultural imperialism, to use the jargon of the day. McDonald's basically was going to put locally family-owned restaurants out of business. And these are called osterias. Apologies for my poor Italian, but that was the idea that slow food started out as a means to counteract so-called fast food and the loss of local food traditions. And as I say, the slow food movement is still in existence in Italy, and every year they produce a guide to small family-owned restaurants throughout Italy, and they're called osterias. So slow food originated as a counter weight to fast food. And they argued, of course, that regional cuisines and typical products are all parts of the cultural identity of a place. So where does the idea of slow food come from? Well, it's tied up with this concept of terroir, a French word, which refers to that combination of physical and human factors that influence what food is grown and raised and how it's prepared and cooked. So many of you may be wine drinkers, and terroir, of course, is the basis for the appellation system, which is, in other words, which links a certain area with a particular wine. And now it's being used to include other foodstuffs, such as meats and cheeses. So I have my palate is not very discerning, but from a geographical perspective, really what they're arguing is that there are these four influences of terroir. There's climate, the soil, the geology, if you like, the terrain, and the cultural factors of tradition. So this is an area around Bordeaux. And the argument is that, buy it or not, it's the whole basis for the wine system is that each of those distinct areas produces a unique flavor of wine, right? I don't know whether your palate's good enough to discern that, but that's the whole idea behind wine, and the value that is attached to wine is this notion of the unique combination, climate, soils, terrain. So for the difference, for example, between a north-facing slope and the south-facing slope, that affects the amount of sunshine that gets. Elevation. Well, in this area around Bordeaux, elevation is pretty uniform. Probably not a big factor. But I'm sure further away from the Atlantic Ocean, that probably has an influence, like inland areas here, probably affects the climate. And it's how these factors interact with one another to produce unique flavors. So each place theoretically has its own unique terroir. Well, you may recognize this. This is the American Viticultural Association. We have 5 distinct wine growing areas in the state of Michigan, and they're listed in order of establishment. I know very little about wine growing in Michigan, except the Leonard Peninsula, and I've never even been there. But obviously, this is what, Kent County, Ottawa County. So we're just south of here. Is this supposedly unique place in Michigan that has certain attributes that makes the wine from that area distinct. The argument being that wine produced in Fenville is somehow different from the Lake Michigan shore. Any of you wine connoisseurs, can you address that? I don't know. Anyway, that's you're welcome to be skeptical. The whole of the United States is divided up into these viticultural areas. California obviously has a lot of them in the Napa Valley and Salinas Valley and some other valleys north of Santa Barbara. But anyway, so terroir then originated with winemaking, and the premise is that each product has a unique taste that is associated with a certain place. So from a marketing perspective, what you're trying to do is to market that place based on its unique food culture. And obviously, as I said at the introduction, this is very appealing to rural areas because obviously that's where food is produced. But rural areas tend to be poorer areas than metro areas, cities. So this is appealing from an economic development. So back in 2011, the Irish Tourist Board decided that they were going to promote food tourism to Ireland. Now, what's the stereotype? And I apologize, Mary. What's the stereotype about our Irish food? Okay, go ahead. That's not the
my husband was from Ireland, and so I started going there in about 1980, and I found things overcooked, a lot of stews, not much in the way of inspired seasoning. It was meant to be wholesome food for people, and the country at that time was very agrarian and probably even third world. Now it's a whole different ball.
Yes. The idea that people would go to Ireland to eat the food is a recent phenomenon. And the same thing can be said, because I'm English and I have to be careful what I say about Irish people for obvious reasons. The same could be said for English food as well. I grew up on, my mother used to boil the heck out of cabbage, serve it with potatoes and a bit of meat on the side. That was Monday evening supper. So yes. So 2011 then, the Irish Tourist Authority decided to get into the food tourism business, and they call it Place on a Plate. And this is the cover of the publication that outlined this strategy of promoting food tourism. And in the booklet, they talk about how to use local food to promote business, to promote, restaurant businesses. The problem, of course, is, and this is something that only academics could spend hours talking about, is what is local? How do we define local food? Anybody? There is no agreed definition of what is local food. So this was the goal that they had. Ireland will be recognized by visitors for the availability, quality, and value of local and regional food, which evokes a unique sense of place, the terroir, if you like. And to promote that unique sense of place, they encourage restaurant owners to offer locally sourced seasonal food on their menus, list the name of suppliers on their menus, and incorporate place names on their menus. And that's not very difficult ideas, but of course, this was the basis of my empirical study, which was to go to a whole bunch of restaurants and examine their menus for the degree to which they listed the name of the suppliers, whether they used local place names on their menus, and the degree to which they used locally sourced seasonal food. And the research was all done, I think, June, so we controlled for that fact. I controlled for that factor. So if you're not familiar with this particular area where I did the research, this is Southwest Ireland. Cork is the largest city, and I was doing the research in this particular area of Ireland. And I'll show you a map of the food trail in a second, but really coastal areas of Southwest Ireland. And what do you think? You can make an educated guess. What do you think one was the primary elements of local food? Fish. Yes, fish. Okay, so let's pause. You're all Michiganders. Is there any place in Michigan that promotes a distinctive regional or local flavor? Frankenmuth, but that's Christmas, right? No? German. It's funny, I drive by Frankenmuth, but I've never been tempted. Is there anything, a lot of German restaurants? Oh, chicken? Okay, any other places? Yes.
And of course, the whole west coast, the blueberries, we really go for the fruits.
Yes. There's a cherry festival, right?
Absolutely.
Blueberry festival.
Yes.
So there are places that in Michigan which are part of this idea of this promoting that distinctiveness of local flavor. Now, what about when it comes to culinary, yes,
Michael, at church yesterday at the Methodist Church, they had a sort of a talk to the person next to you type of thing on food. And I said something about bratwurst, and I don't know anything about what I'm going to say, but this woman said, you need to get to Dublin, Michigan, in the heart of Manistee County for the best bratwurst in the world. Now, I know nothing about that, but I think it's an appropriate comment
Oh,
to your talk.
absolutely. Again, I think I know where Manistee County is, and that's the extent of my knowledge. Anybody else want to comment on that?
I was going to say whitefish in the Charlevoix and St. Ignace area. I mean, there's really only a few areas involving the Great Lakes where I think you can get whitefish.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we will address whitefish when we come to talk about the Upper Peninsula's distinct distinctiveness as a food destination. So thinking outside the state, are there places in the US that promote their culinary distinctiveness? That to me is the most obvious. Cajun cuisine, Creole.
Right, Michael, New Mexico with their green peppers and their red peppers. And if you want both, it's Christmas. But they offer these sauces made with these peppers all around the state of New Mexico.
Yeah. So you get the idea, right? That there are places that use food to promote their distinctiveness. And I don't know, again, one of the benefits about standing up here is I can throw out questions and you don't even have to answer them because I don't know the answers all the time. So Pure Michigan is the state's tagline. Are there places that could utilize that tagline to promote food tourism? I don't know the answer. Distinct places, Pure Michigan. Something to do with the water, beer? I don't know. Yes,
What about the UP with the pasties?
yes,
That would be something that's very unique to Michigan, I would think.
yes. Oh. Go ahead.
That came from England.
Yes. However, having lived in the UP, it is contested because the Finns also claim to have brought pasties. So if you go on the Keweenaw Peninsula, it's the Finns and it's not the Cornish. So, all right. Well, hopefully you're getting the idea behind this. So let's move on and consider food tourism. How many of you consider yourself to be food tourists? What do you like to do when you go to a place?
Yeah, hold on, I'm sorry.
To have authentic. I enjoy going to places that are locally owned, that have local foods, locally grown foods, locally produced foods, and that may not necessarily be well advertised
Mm-hmm.
or recognized. I've had some fabulous foods.
You used one of those key words that academics like to debate. What do you mean by authentic?
Well, local.
Lo-
That was my intention, that
Yeah.
restaurants that do cite specifically where they source their food, either if it's the farm, if it's an organic farm, either through organically grown meats and poultry, etc., or organic, obviously vegetables and fruits.
Farm to table restaurants.
Yes, although that's kind of a trendy title. I think that there have been many local establishments that have been doing that for generations.
To her point, some of the best food I've ever had in any place. And we love road trips as well. are these hole in the wall dives that aren't much to look at from a building standpoint,
Mhm.
but boy, they can put something on your plate.
Okay.
I'll be with you, Mary, in a minute.
I was going to say, we enjoy going to farmers markets and seafood markets in foreign countries because you get a sense of what the locals are eating. And a lot of times I think that might be locally sourced, although not always. And sometimes they'll say it's from Africa or something, but it's been interesting to observe those places.
Yeah, that's an interesting observation you make. Because in Europe, at least historically, the EU required that whenever you sold any produce, you had to put the country of origin, so that if you, in the wintertime, I know I did a study of where Waitrose is a British supermarket, where they were getting their vegetables from. So green beans came from Kenya. Senegal was also a big provider of vegetables to England. Now you have to know where Senegal is. It's a country in West Africa, below the Sahara. So in wintertime, it's summertime in Senegal. So, yeah.
Potosi's in Wisconsin, root beer.
Okay.
And they were manufacturers of regular beer until, it was outlawed.
Mhm.
And then they changed to root beer. And I tell you, their name for it, and the whole city is wrapped around their root beer. It's excellent.
Yeah, not something I've ever acquired a taste for, but it's okay. So food tourists, who are you? Well, that's one of
Okay, just for fun, we just came from the Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont area. And our goal was to find a lobster roll along the coast.
Mhm.
Well, we've been there before and it was no problem. There were always shacks and whatever. Took us 2 hours to find a place. And the gal in the antique store said, "Oh, well, you can go to Days, but most tourists wouldn't go there." And so we find this place on the marsh to the ocean, and there's the lobster traps. It's just rustic as can be. You walk in the door and the woman says, "I have lobster rolls and crab rolls. What would you like?" That's it. In the case was fresh lobster meat for $11 a pound. I mean, I was like, wow. And then the only place you can sit is you go down the stairs around the back of the building to sit on the marsh. And she comes out on the porch and you lift a tray down and there's your rolls. So it truly was authentic, but there's very few left.
Wow. Well, you see, that's a wonderful advertisement you provided for that place. And I suggest you speak with don't know your name, and I'm sure she'd be happy to share the name of the business with you. So many of us use Google or Yelp, TripAdvisor to figure out where to eat, right? And food tourists are everywhere. Why are we interested in food tourists? Because they tend to be well educated, have high disposable income, and they're adventurous. So that's the reason why we want food tourists, because you've got deep pockets and you will be able to pay for your food or your delicious food. Okay, what's the appeal from the community's perspective? Primarily because they don't have many other alternatives of economic development. They're already tied to the land. So trying to get people to sell, local farmers to sell their food to local restaurants is seen as a viable means of economic development. Now, in Europe, and to some extent in the United States, consumers are attracted to local food to avoid some of the ill effects of industrialized agriculture. The most most famous being Mad Cow. And did we talk about Mad Cow when I was here in February? It never really took off in the United States. It took off in Canada a little bit, but certainly it was a disastrous impact in Europe, particularly in Britain, where people ended up dying from eating contaminated meat. Yes.
I'd like to ask another question, though, if I could,
Oh,
on
sure.
food tourism. Is a restaurant food tourism? Now, you're talking about distinctive foods, but I've got two examples. There used to be a restaurant in Marshall, Michigan, everybody went to, and I can't think of what the name. Win Schuler's. Everybody, so apparently it's well known. I know in Savannah, Georgia, where I lived, and we used to take people out to lunch. There's a very obscure building with no sign in front. And they make a point out, there is no sign in front. They were on Good Morning America, and they refused to give their address because they did not want business. And it's called Ms. Wilkes Boarding House. Now, if you live in Savannah, you could go around. We all know where it was. There's a line at 11:30. If it's raining, that's your personal problem. Don't bring that up to us. You go in, you sit down at tables of 12. I've sat with federal court judges there, one time with a senator. When you get done, it's your job to clear the place, and you have to go back in the kitchen and put your dishes in the sink. Now, is that food tourism? I don't know, but it draws a lot of people to Savannah, Georgia.
Yeah, last bullet point there. It sounds to me what you're describing is an authentic, unique experience. And food tourists, and indeed, I don't know whether all tourists, but certainly food tourists are attracted at the prospect of tasting and experiencing something that is unique and authentic. And it sounds like that is exactly what you've just described.
I've been on several trips to Europe, and a lot of the places now, the farms themselves have opened restaurants, like cutting out the middleman to the restaurant in town and using buildings they already have. And a lot of them are family operations. And so the families all work at the farms, but that's been something that is quite new, I think, in many areas.
Yeah, it's called agri-tourism. And I was reading last week in The Economist, in Britain now, got to remember the statistics, maybe what my wife can tell. Do you remember what I said about I came down here for the wedding in Grand Rapids, and in Britain now, more weddings take place on farms than in hotels, which is remarkable. But it also attests at just how difficult it is to make money as a farmer. That's why obviously farmers are doing this. They're trying to diversify. All right, we should probably move on here to talk a little bit about food trails, and then we'll get to the results of the analysis. So food trails are used in marketing a place to visitors. You can have a walking tour, bus tours, self-guided tours. And the problem with a food trail is, as you might imagine, you provide people with a map, you list the restaurants. What happens if you go to one of those restaurants and the food is terrible? It's still an experience, but what's your likelihood that you will then continue on the trail? You probably, oh, geez, this is it. Come all this way. Chances are you will give up. And that's one of the problems with a food trail. You have to ensure that all the restaurants that are listed on the food trail provide a consistency of product, if you like. And that can, a bad experience could tarnish the entire trail's reputation. And the other thing is sometimes food trails just fall by the wayside. the people, they continue to advertise them even though the restaurants are no longer participating in the food trail, and that's a problem too. So in preparation for this, I was looking for food trails in the United States. So this is the Taco Trail. And do you know where this is? Concord, California. And there's a list, I think, of over 40 different taco restaurants in this one town. And I'm not sure whether I'd be tempted to go to Concord, but on the basis of a taco trail, but this next one is more my speed. This is the donut trail. And do you know where Butler County's donut trail is? This is a guide for it's north of Cincinnati. So if you're ever headed towards Cincinnati and want to spend a day or two consuming donuts, there is the Butler County Donut Trail, and I heartily recommend it. Okay, so food trails, you can have them tied to a particular type of food, whether it's donuts, whether it's tacos. Wine trails. West Cork got into the food business primarily because, like much of Ireland up until fairly recently, had fallen on hard times. And in the case of the West Cork, it dates all the way back to the potato famine in the 1840s, and people fled Ireland. And again, there are a number of museums in West Cork documenting the effects of the potato famine. But in the last 20 or 30 years or so, since Ireland has joined the European Union, it has benefited from an influx of European Union funds to these so-called marginal areas of the EU. And they embrace this idea of food tourism, food branding. And if any of you ever been to West Cork, it is absolutely gorgeous. It is just it's wonderful. It's so green, whether you're there in December or whether you're there in June and July. It is just absolutely gorgeous. So West Cork then is this culinary heart of Ireland, and they promoted themselves as this place apart. And you can go a taste of West Cork. There are certain foods that are allowed to use the so-called Fuchsia brand. So you go into a supermarket, you will see cheeses with that brand on the right-hand side on it. So it is a culturally distinctive place when it comes to food. So 3 trails were developed for West Cork. One was in the city of Cork, one is to the east of the city of Cork, and the third one was the West Cork Food Trail. And I decided to go on the West Cork Food Trail. It's a 3-day self-guided tour. And you begin in Cork, you go to Kinsale, and then you go down, you see Clonakilty there. And I drove along that route and stopped off at, I think it was just over 50 restaurants. And, well, a few pictures. Kinsale, any of you been to Kinsale? They considered themselves to be the Newport, Rhode Island and Kinsale are twinned, because it's the home of people who are serious sailors who want to sail their yachts out into the Atlantic. Clonakilty, I think I told you in the introduction, I'd done some research in Clonakilty. as a result of Slow Cities research. And Clonakilty is small town of about 4,500 people, and I befriended a restaurant owner there. Interestingly enough, he was from the island of Mauritius. You know where Mauritius is? It's in the Indian Ocean. So he went from Mauritius to London, and then he came to Ireland, and he was, oh boy, I don't remember my Irish celebrities. He'd be personal chef. Who was the guy that did all that dancing? River dance? Yes, he was Michael Flatley's personal chef. And then he had his own TV show, but he also had a restaurant in Clonakilty. Why am I telling you about the Michigan? Oh yes, some guy in Michigan wanted him to come to Michigan to open a restaurant. And for some unknown reason, he couldn't get a visa. But anyway, Clonakilty is a really nice place. Lots of good restaurants. Ross Carberry, another town along the trail, and Glendore. I don't have a picture of the place, but in the foreground here on the left, the town is in back of behind that wall, and I don't know. I feel like going there right now. That's the Atlantic Ocean in the background. Just a beautiful place, very quiet, peaceful, calm. Okay, I'm not sure whether we need to go over these things. Oh yeah, maybe the last one. I guess that's a key idea. What do you think that phrase "putting place on a plate" means? Yes.
You know, in the days of where you get
Just 1 minute. Can you pass that?
in these days of agribusiness where you can have food shipped from all over the world, to have something local has the connotation you're supporting the local business, that it's fresh from the farm to your plate, that people are taking pride in it, and you don't have all the kind of Franken food images of all the things that they do to have such large. I mean, we've stopped growing or raising cattle, for instance, in favor of it just being a manufacturing commodity with all of the horrors attached.
Yeah, question at the back. A comment.
I don't normally read my cell phone in class, but I got to thinking about some business travel and it brought it up to me. And the title is The Culinary Coast, and it is a trademarked name, by the way. So it's got TM behind it. And it says, our culinary coast has become, quote, the star mid-Atlantic foodie mecca. And what we're talking about is Delaware, south of Dover, Delaware, so down to the Maryland border near Salisbury. But apparently they made that now the foodie mecca. So
Well,
I don't know how that it relates to class.
Oh no, it's an excellent point you make. The only thing I know about that area, it's where Frank Perdue started raising chickens, and that area supposedly stinks to high heaven from all the waste from the poultry barns. But now it's what did you call it? The Culinary Coast?
It's a trademark name. So that means they've got a trademark on it called the Culinary Coast. And they're saying it's become the mid-Atlantic foodie mecca is what the quote is.
Yeah.
And it's under culinary-coast-de.com.
Yeah, it's close to Washington, D.C. So a bunch of think about our well-educated professionals large disposable income, take 2 hours to drive out from DC to the culinary coast. Okay, yes, ma'am.
We have a couple more suggestions in the chat here. Alaskan seafood and the north end of Boston promoting Italian food.
Mhm.
And there's also a question. Would you consider farm to table an outgrowth of food tourism?
Which came first? Chicken or the egg? I don't know the answer to that. Go back to the slow food movement. I don't, anything I say is speculation. Okay, so again, this is a very academic question. What constitutes local food? How do you define what local is? And there is no answer to that. We talked about food trails, right? We talked a little bit, and some of you have been on food trails and Bourbon Trail. Okay, so let's talk about the results of the research that was done on the West Cork Food Trail. So you get the idea. What I'm interested in is, do these menus contain evidence of where the food came from, a list of providers? Do they incorporate local place names? In other words, are they conveying any sense of place? So the restaurant's local food producers, suppliers, geographical place names, and so forth, the origin of foods. So I collected just over 50 restaurants, and I took pictures of all the menus, and then I started to analyze, do a content analysis. So how successful were they in promoting local food? Well, first off, key finding there, close to 60% of establishments failed to include any statement as to their local food suppliers. And Kinsale, which is the yachting capital of Ireland, and considers itself to be Ireland's gourmet food capital. Nearly 10 years ago, it was one of the few places in Ireland that had a Michelin restaurant in Kinsale. I think there may be a few more since then, but anyway, bottom line is, not many establishments were really interested in listing local suppliers. A little bit different in Clonakilty because this is a slow city. And the whole idea behind slow cities is to implement some of the ideas about slow food. And there, 66% of restaurants included a statement as to the origin of their food suppliers. So a little bit difference in Clonakilty because of its connection with the slow food movement. So here's some pictures from some menus. So this is the menu, Rich's in Clonakilty. Now Rich's, I forget his last name, but he's Michael Flatley's former chef. So he lists on here where he gets the dairy products from in Clonakilty, goat cheese from someplace in Cork, fish, seafood from Rosscarbery, a butcher in Clonakilty, poultry from Clonakilty, smoked fish from Castle Townsend, which is a small town on the coast. And the others are just definitions. Now, this place in Baltimore, right on the edge of Ireland, don't know how much you can read of this, but I'll read top left-hand corner. It says, each morning ingredients are gathered from the local area for the evening's menu. Seafood comes direct from the fishing boats, only a stone's throw away. Meat is sourced from local farmers and hunters, fruit and vegetables from market gardeners, and wild ingredients that forage foraged in the surrounding countryside. The menu changes according to what ingredients are available at that moment, providing an honest taste of time and place. This is, you know, it doesn't get any better in terms of describing this idea of a unique sense of place and taste with that particular restaurant. However, this restaurant is only open for 3 months of the year. And the only people that can afford to eat there are tourists, not the local people. So a 5-course menu in June was 55 euros, in June, July and August, 65. And this is 8 years ago. Oh, obviously, if they're still in business, which of course is debatable, the prices have obviously gone up. This particular business model is probably not sustainable. Here's another example from a restaurant. So you go into the restaurant and you're provided with a list of all the local food suppliers and the food that comes from these places. The problem is, like, Danny Miles provides chicken and strawberries. Who is Danny Miles? And does Danny live locally? Okay. Rose and herbs, apples and potatoes. Stephen provides leeks, onions, and goat cheese. So it's hard to discern a sense of place because it assumes customers know these suppliers and their locations. Nevertheless, this is an example of a local restaurant that is trying to embrace this idea of conveying a sense of place through telling people where their food comes from. Okay, so what about place names and references to places on menus? So there are just over 1,400 items, and out of those 1,400 items, about 300 places were actually listed, just over a fifth. Now, in terms of the names of the places, the most common name was Ireland or Irish. So that's not really very helpful, right? It's not, you're in Ireland. We're really looking for more local places like Clonakilty, Rosscarbery, Oysterhaven, Kinsale. Those are all examples of local places. But 80% of menu items had no geographical place name. And the most important, those places that did list the place, or those items that did have a place attached to them, Ireland was the most common term. So you had like Irish lamb stew, Irish venison steak. We guarantee to use Irish beef. Not really conveying much of a unique sense of place because you're already in Ireland. West Cork was often used to describe seafood pie as an example, or West Cork salmon. Other places, Atlantic. The whole of the west coast of Ireland, probably 10, 15 years ago, embraced this idea of the Wild Atlantic Way, this coastal route that like 1,500 miles long, which is a touring route that starts not far from Cork and goes all the way up to Northern Ireland. And so Wild Atlantic Way, if you Google that, you'll find a website that promotes tourism along the Atlantic coast. And the use of the word Atlantic is a way of describing the unique place of this West Cork. Okay, anything else here? Few restaurants, there are just a select few that actually had over 40% of their menu items linked with place names. And those tended to be, if I remember correctly, in Clonakilty. So what do we what do we make of all this? Here I was, the big build-up was we're trying to connect place with food. Most restaurants avoided referring to where they obtained their food supplies. Those restaurants that did attempt to link some food, some menu items with place names, the dominant sense of place was Ireland and not West Cork. And very few restaurants attempted to provide that local, authentic food experience, with the exception of the Muse restaurant in Baltimore. Remember, that's the one where it starts out, they begin their day by just going down to the dock, see what fish is available, contracting with local farmers. That's that's the model. Unfortunately, from a business sense, it probably doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So back in 2011, then the Irish government decides to promote putting place on a plate. How successful were they? How successful were they?
Hold on, we'll get you a mic.
I guess I need a little clarification. Your results, it sounds to me like you collected the menus. Is that
Mhm.
correct? Did you visit each one of the restaurants?
I had to.
Right. And did you eat at each one of the restaurants?
Unfortunately, no.
Okay. So the conclusions were sort of based on what was in print.
Yes.
How would we know whether the restaurant and the dining experience provided, if it was successful in putting the place up on a plate?
Well, the metric that I used was, did they list where their food came from? Did they list local suppliers? That's one thing. And if they didn't, then not good. Secondly, did they use local geographical place names to link a place with a particular food, like fish from Fort Townsend or wherever? That's the idea. To what extent did they promote that sense of place through food? Obviously, I didn't taste the food. My budget didn't extend that far, but some restaurants were much more successful in embracing this idea than others. And I guess that gets to the question, why do you think it was? It's largely, the big build-up, right? Not much here. So why? Yes, sir.
Who has their hand up? All right.
I'm going to defer to the majority of people in the class who have, sounds like, have traveled much more extensively, at least worldwide, than I have. But I don't know, as jumping to the question number 3, what would you expect from traveling along the food trail? If I'm going to do the fact that I'm eating, yes, maybe there's an attachment to a certain cuisine or certain type of food, but the fact that I'm in Ireland, eating in an Irish restaurant is probably might be my.
That's good enough.
Yeah, you bet. You bet. So, for what it's worth.
Okay. Couple of other people at the back. Our booze trail.
Do you have a sense of the economic impact of this campaign?
No, I don't. No, good question. I don't. Clearly wasn't very successful, and why is it not successful? Do any of you have relatives in the restaurant business? Yeah, you probably have a better insight than most, but anyway,
Well,
Tricia.
I just wanted to make a point about in my own community, and I live in Saugatuck, where I have seen restaurants try to do that, partnering with local farmers and meat producers and all that. It was great while it lasted, but it was really hard to sustain. And part of it is we're the problem. We come in and we want a full menu. We want it to be dependable. We don't want to, just eat what's in season. It's most of them have, if they're going to last, they have to make some concessions.
Yeah, I think a lot of restaurants try this, and then they prefer to contract with Cisco to. Yes.
I can take this from two viewpoints. At a restaurant for 30 years. And this whole thing about getting farm to table didn't start then. But, one nice, local people would bring in her tomatoes, and another day somebody else would. But so it's very hard to be consistent to what you have on the menu. The other thing that I thought was very interesting, our best-selling item was walleye. And it does not grow in Lake Macatawa. It's not attained in Lake Michigan. And so the idea of being local, yes, it was a Great Lakes fish. But yes, it comes in frozen because it's a better product when it's been frozen. You can handle it better and blah, 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 blah. The people didn't really care. And this goes back to my present point is being a consumer. I don't really care. Sometimes I read a menu and I'm going, what? This is from here and here and here. I just want to make sure it's good and I'm loving it. And I don't really need to know the geography.
Okay. Fair enough.
Just a comment and a point of amusement, perhaps. You're familiar with these scratch and sniff for perfumes and magazines. A number of years ago, like 80s, people were moving like crazy to West Michigan, where you grow hogs and beef and chicken and stuff like that. And they built McMansions, and they got super mad that it was stinky. So as an advertisement, Chamber of Commerce put out, maybe people remember this, a beautiful picture of the countryside, big houses. It says scratch and sniff before you decide to move here. And it was cow manure.
Huh. Okay. Yes.
I have an update on the Muse restaurant that you talked about in Baltimore. It actually went out of business in January of 2020. When you think, oh, maybe COVID, but no, the chef moved on and has another restaurant in Baltimore still. His name is Didi, I guess. And so the new restaurant's called Didi, and he's still using local Irish ingredients. The tasting menu for dinner is now 180 euros.
180?
Yes, 100 euros for lunch.
Wow.
And that's without the matching wine pairing.
Plus you have to get there.
Yeah.
It's all right. 200
American dollars.
Okay, so where is this?
Marquette.
Marquette, Michigan. So this just a brief follow-up. So having done a research project in Southwest Ireland, and I think my second to last year before I left Northern, I decided to sort of replicate a similar study in my hometown. Tourism is really important to the UP. 2022, tourists spent about $280 million on food and beverage in the UP. So Marquette, along with Mackinac County, are the two largest tourist destinations in the UP. Mackinac gets about 1.2 million visitors a year in that brief summer that we get in the UP. Marquette's tourist season is spread out over a longer period, or at least historically over a longer period when there's been a winter. The last couple of years, for example, big tourist attraction would be the UP 200, a dog sled race. No, we don't have enough snow for the doggies to run on. And other cross-country, the Noquemanon, which is a big cross-country ski race, that too has had run into problems during the winter time. But anyway, point is, tourism is big business. So theoretically, we might be able to promote the UP as a tourist destination using food. And some of you already mentioned some examples of UP foods. So what are they? Whitefish, yes. Pasties. Anything else? What's that? Any smoked fish? Berries? Berries are really big. Native Americans depended upon wild rice. That's something that grows naturally in the UP. Wild berries. Maple syrup. So that, excuse me? Fudge. Yeah. So there are theoretically, there are attributes of the UP that could be promoted on a menu. So wild rice would be a good example. Wild blueberries. Blueberry picking is big business. In August, I think, is when the wild blueberries are picked. And people are incredibly protective of their blueberry patch. They don't want people to know where you're going blueberry picking because they don't want other people to come along and take them. Thimbleberries, venison, maple syrup fish. And then, of course, the immigrants, Cornish pasties, or I guess if we have any Finns in the audience, I'll say Finnish pasties. Kadagi, which is sausage, big in Ishpeming in Marquette County. So you could theoretically incorporate some of these items into on a menu to promote the UP's sense of place. So similar methodology, identifying American restaurants. There were 20 of them, I think, and just looking at the content of these menus and analyzing them in terms of, do they provide a statement as to the origin of the food suppliers, a listing of the restaurant's local food producers, geographical place names, linked with individual menu items. So essentially replicating the same methodology. So out of the 20, there are 5 restaurants that actually included a local food statement. So the sorts of thing, in the second bullet point there, at the bottom of one of the restaurant menus, there was sources from the following local farms and fish house. So Superior Angus beef, Seeds and Spores, White Marble Farms, Partridge Farm, Phil's Fish House. Those are all locally owned, except for, I think, White Marble Farms. That was a typo. That comes courtesy of Cisco. I'm not sure how that, but Partridge Farm is a farm up in Ishpeming. Phil's Fish House is on the waterfront in Marquette. Seeds and Spores is a locally owned farm in just outside of Marquette County. Superior Angus Beef, that's in the central UP. Anyway, only 5 restaurants provided some sort of local food statement. We looking at place names? Hardly. This was, again, the results were nothing much was going on. Only 42 out of just over 1,000 items actually identified a place. And the most frequently cited places were Lake Superior and Michigan. So Lake Superior whitefish would be a good example. Most restaurant owners were reluctant to purchase locally produced food. And that gets to one of the reasons we talked about a second ago, the reliability of suppliers. If you're putting together a menu, you don't, unless it's a different type of restaurant, like the Muse restaurant in Baltimore, you want to rely upon your suppliers to provide a predictable and consistent supply of food items throughout the summer. We won't even get into what happens during the winter time. And that's one of the problems with linking local food with local restaurants, is the whole reliability factor. People who own restaurants, it's a very difficult business to begin with. But if you don't have reliable food supply, that's a big problem. However, this last bullet point, have any of you heard of the Milkweed Inn? Well, you should. Okay, the owner of the Milkweed Inn is a Michelin star restaurateur from Chicago. She gave up her Michelin star in Chicago and came to the Ottawa National Forest to open up the Milkweed Inn. And the food consists of sustainably foraged foods, fish, berries, mushrooms, foods, and foods grown in the inn's gardens. The cost per weekend for 1 room and 5 full meals is anywhere between $2,000 and $4,000. $2,000 and $4,000 for 5 meals. What do you get for your 5 meals? Well, you come up on a Friday, and you have a meal then. You have 3 meals on Saturday, and they give you a breakfast on the Sunday morning when you leave. And the place is sold out years in advance. So you want to Google Milkweed Inn. I don't even know whether they're taking reservations for next year, but this is a young woman who has embraced the UP. He only has to work Friday afternoon, Saturday, Sunday, and you live or you stay in a cabin. And I think the quality of the cabin determines the price as much as anything else. If you go to their website, there are pictures of people sampling this food, and none of them look like people in this room. I'm sorry, it's not the demographic she's appealing to. It's your children. It's people in their 20s and 30s. I think once you reach 40, you don't go there, but it's all young people who are obviously have very deep pockets, and they drive up from Chicago for a long weekend, and it's a gold mine. Who knew the UP is the culinary destination? She will not tell you. you only get the instructions on how to find the place on that Friday afternoon. I mean, it's hidden away in Ottawa National Forest. So a lot of restaurants will have that location. No, not with us. Okay, so theoretically, it would be possible to create a UP food brand, because people who live up there already have this strong sense of identity. They are UPers, but for the very practical reasons of reliability and consistency, it becomes very, very difficult. And another study was done, a similar study to my study was done in the Door County, Wisconsin. The same thing. They were all, the University of Wisconsin Extension tried to promote local food, linking local food producers, working with local restaurants to encourage this sense of unique sense of place. But the same reasons, it was unsuccessful. So it sounds great on paper, but the reality is of implementing these ideas is difficult, primarily for the cost factor. So let's open it up for the last few minutes to the last one. I know nothing about Holland, Michigan. It clearly has a distinct identity, right? Does it include food? We got yes, we got no. So what would be distinctive about Holland's food?
Please raise your hand if you have an answer here.
Okay, so just for fun, pigs in a blanket or pea soup.
Pea soup?
Absolutely.
I would travel all the way to Holland for pea soup.
Well, what about lunch today, Michael? We served Michael and his wife, Mr. K's gyros, Kozak's gyros, and they're pretty darn special, I think.
But are they distinctive?
No.
No. Sorry. It was very nice. Don't get me wrong, it was delicious. Yes. We got pigs in blanket and we got pea soup.
Yeah.
Help me out here. I'm not.
Almond paste in a pot.
Huh. Okay. Just for the holidays? Is that widely known among?
Yeah.
I'm not. Okay.
I just wanted to mention, along with blueberries, right down the street here, there's Bowerman's and they have everything blueberry, including coffee.
Yeah,
Blueberry coffee.
by mistake, I got some blueberry coffee from Bauman's yesterday. It was distinctive.
I just wanted to mention, if any of you have ever watched, there's a show on PBS called Under the Radar, and they go all around Michigan, and often they're in local restaurants sampling their food, and it's amazing how many good restaurants there are all across Michigan, including the UP, that they bring attention to. So that's kind of a fun resource.
I hate to say it, but some of the worst food experiences in the United States have been in the Upper Peninsula. For yours truly. There was a place called the Happy Italian in Iron River. Yeah, the building has been demolished since. It was just memorable. Okay,
Um,
but
you know,
about out of time.
Dutch cooking is basically meat and potatoes.
Mhm.
And my mom never put in a whole lot of spices or anything. So it's just kind of, to us, that's what we're used to. But I've been doing lunches for some kids at Escape Ministries, and they are used to spice. And they can't get over how bland the Dutch food is. So it's basically a very meat and potato, nothing too exciting.
Okay, well, I guess I don't really have anything more to say, except that food tourism is increasingly popular, and places can be marketed on the basis of their unique food attributes. But to quote my father, there's many a slip between the cup and the lip. So you have this idea, but actually implementing it runs into very practical difficulties. And the most obvious one is the reliability and predictability of sources. So that you can market a place on its unique attributes. The devil lies in the details. Okay, so thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Michael. We appreciate that. It was kind of fun hearing about these different places and different approaches to local development. The staff wants me to remind you to push your chairs in under the table as you